Welcome back, I'm Hermine with the second episode in our series on the big security challenges facing the European Union. The way we deal with these challenges will shape our safety, our freedom, and really our everyday well-being in the future. Last time we talked about defense. Today we are turning to energy security because without a steady and affordable supply of energy, including electricity, our economy and the way we live day to day would take a serious hit. Right after it had recovered from the effects of the pandemic, the European Union was faced with a major energy crisis due to the disruption of Russian gas supplies caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Energy prices have soared, and this has forced the EU to take stock and consider how it can reduce its dependency on Russian energy supplies. As much as Europe is now experiencing a little reprieve, the situation remains far from satisfactory. Electricity prices are still higher than they were before the crisis, and nearly twice as high as in other major countries and competitors like China and the US. This puts pressure on households' purchasing power and businesses' competitiveness. Guillaume Kerlero de Rosbo, an expert in energy and ecological transition at the Rousseau Institute in France, summarizes the situation in an interview with Tamara, our colleague at Euranet.
Today, the European Union imports most of the energy it consumes, around 60%, mainly because we have very few fossil fuel resources. So we import around 90% of the oil we consume, 80% of our gas, and 60% of our coal. These fossil fuels are sourced from a variety of countries, not all of which are friendly, with some actually hostile, Russia, for example, from whom we still purchase a portion of our gas.
So what can the EU do to reduce this dependence and at the same time improve its energy security and ensure the prosperity of its citizens in tomorrow's world? The first response was to disengage from Russia and to diversify our suppliers. The European Union came up with a strategy named Repower EU Plan. It allowed Russia's share of the bloc's natural gas imports, both via pipeline and LNG liquefied natural gas, to fall to below 19%. In addition, Brussels had committed to reducing this figure all the way to zero by the end of 2027. Meanwhile, the United States, Norway and Qatar have now become our main sources of gas imports. But here lies our next problem, the fact that we import nearly half of our liquefied natural gas from the United States means that we remain heavily dependent on another nation for our energy supply. If the US decided to stop supplying us or suddenly raise prices, and that's not just a hypothetical situation, we'd be in chaos again. The key is to establish win-win relationship, says Francesco Sassi from the Bologna-based private body RIE, which specializes in energy consultancy and research. And he's speaking to Radio 24 journalist Giulia.
Noi dobbiamo stare molto attenti a come queste interdipendenze energetiche.
We must lay close attention to how these energy interdependencies are likely to evolve over time, to how our relations with these countries will evolve in all areas. European energy security cannot be ensured without stable, long-term relationships that offer positive outcomes both for us and for our partners. Without these types of relationship, it will be impossible for Europe to maintain and guarantee sufficient energy supplies in the near future.
To sum up, dependencies are difficult to avoid, so it's all about minimizing the risks, says Kerlero de Rosbo.
Strategic dependencies are unavoidable. The aim is to decide with whom to form such a dependency and to minimize it as far as possible by producing what we can at home, but not just any old how. Indeed, one advantage of being able to produce domestically is that we can do so under better social and environmental conditions.
So, how can we achieve greater autonomy in this area?
The only path to greater self-sufficiency is firstly, to reduce our consumption. Secondly, to electrify as many things as possible, because we know how to produce electricity at home. And thirdly, to produce this electricity using low-carbon technologies, typically from renewable energy sources supplemented potentially by nuclear power.
We also need to prioritize improving our strategic reserves, for example, by increasing our gas and oil storage capacities for use in case of emergencies. Another way to increase our energy independence is by producing energy ourselves. The EU considers clean energy to be both vital in the fight against climate change and an opportunity to increase the bloc's energy independence. In line with our global commitments to drastically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and limit the consequences of climate change, the EU has committed to an energy transition. And to support this transition, new laws have been created. These include the REPowerEU plan, which I have already mentioned, and the so-called Fit for 50 package, which aims to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030. The idea is to slowly stop using fossil fuels, so coal, oil and gas, and replace them with clean and cheap alternatives, such as solar, hydraulic or wind power, or even hydrogen, for instance. This is what Professor Vidmantas Jankauskas, a Lithuanian energy expert, tells my colleague Auguste on Žinių radijas.
Europe has very few resources of its own, so its task is to find some. And what resources does Europe have at its disposal? Renewable energies, of course. And we can see the tremendous pace at which we are moving towards a future based on renewable energy.
And indeed, in the first half of 2024, the EU produced more than half of its electricity from renewable sources. In 2034, wind energy became the second largest source of electricity production in Europe after nuclear power. By contrast, in 2022, less than 40% of electricity came from renewables. And another relative newcomer to the energy market is hydrogen. Hydrogen is mainly valued for two reasons. It's a clean source of energy, and it can be used in many different ways. Right now, its production costs are high, and to date, its deployment still relies heavily on subsidies. But it's only a matter of time before new technologies, such as this one, reach maturity in the market. Esteban, our colleague from Es Radio Castilla y León, talks to Jan Dumont, Vice President of Veolum, expert in renewable development projects.
The industry we have created has reached very interesting levels. I started in the renewable energy sector 20 years ago, and at that time, there were very high subsidies in place to make these systems profitable. But today, wind and solar energy don't require subsidies. That's the path we have to take for other technologies too. Hydrogen currently depends on subsidies, fine, but it just needs to be developed.
But we shouldn't put all our efforts into developing new electricity generation infrastructure. We also need to make Europe's old electricity distribution infrastructure better and bigger. In fact, much of it was constructed in the mid-20th century and is approaching or has already exceeded its expected lifespan. This increases the risks of outages and inefficiency. One way to make it stronger is by linking up grids across borders so that when one country has too much or too little electricity, others can help balance it out. And all of this will contribute to bringing prices down, says Virgil Daniel Popescu, member of the European Parliament and former Romanian energy minister. He's speaking with Stefan at Radio Romania.
A decrease in the price of electricity can only be achieved by increasing production capacities and increasing interconnections between states. For as long as we do not increase electricity production in our country, in our region, in Europe, we will not have lower electricity prices. And clearly, this goes hand in hand with increasing interconnections and the length of the transmission and distribution networks.
Before Europe was hit by a crisis, investing in local low-carbon energy was the European bloc's undisputed path to a greener and more energy-secure future. A goal that is actually almost on track to meet. But Brussels now faces a green backlash from big segments of its population. The clamor to preserve the economies and existing strategic industries is only getting louder, which makes sense given concerns about the bloc's long-term security. Indeed, key sections of our economies, still rely on conventional energy inputs. As such, renewable energies must continue to be supplemented by other solutions, such as natural gas and nuclear energy, says Kostilis Tambolis, president of the Southeast Europe Energy Institute, to Nikos and Mariana at Greek radio station Sky.
I don't think we should be aiming for 100% energy independence. That's completely unrealistic from an economic point of view. But we do need to increase locally produced energy sources as much as possible. Not just renewables, but also natural gas and nuclear energy, which we are capable of producing.
This is why the development of new, smaller and potentially safer nuclear reactors is also increasingly being considered across the EU. So we need to find the right mix. So this means deciding how much oil and gas to source and from where. It also means deciding what low-carbon energies to invest in and which European industries and economic sectors to prop up, among other key questions. Let's return to Italian expert Francesco Sassi for a closing remark.
Viviamo in un mondo diverso, nuovo, ci dobbiamo
We live in a different world, a new world, and we must ask ourselves whether the responses we have made to our energy insecurity over recent decades are applicable in this context, or whether it would be better to come up with a new recipe to get us out of this crisis. Hydrocarbons will certainly continue to play a very important role in the European energy mix because, as we can see, the transition is not a one-off thing. It is a process that has perhaps been depicted too simplistically as something quick and easy.
While tomorrow's Europe will probably not be completely energy self-sufficient, we do have all the necessary ingredients to achieve sufficient stability, provided we agree not to skip any of the steps in the recipe. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate it and share it with your friends. Make sure to come back next week for our third episode on the EU's future energy challenges. We'll be looking into our need for critical raw materials and ores, which are key to securing our digital future. Take care until then.